Joining us in Budapest, Csaba Wolf, Vice President of ChinaCham with the Hungarian Chinese Chamber of Economy. Joining us in Beijing, Li Yong, Chief Researcher at the DNC think tank. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Your first response to the decision being made by the EU regarding definitive tariffs against China-made electronic vehicles. Mr. Wolf.
Yeah, the EU countries actually have very diverse opinion on this issue, but most probably these tariffs will be voted. The two actually main opponents of these tariffs are Germany and Hungary. Both are for probably different reasons. Hungary is having a China-friendly policy. There are a lot of big Chinese investments in Hungary, and Hungary's government's intention is definitely not to put any control on Chinese products or Chinese investments in Europe. However, Germany has a different approach to this issue. Germany has China as one of its major export markets. So Germany is probably trying to avoid countermeasures taken by the Chinese government. BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, the big OEMs in Germany, they are actually exporting a lot of cars to China. So any kind of tariffs against Chinese EV vehicles floating to Europe might affect the German exports to China, and probably that is why Germany is not really agreeing on these tariffs.
We understand, Mr. Li, at this moment, on October the 7th, today, the teams coming from China and the EU side are still in negotiation, hopefully with some further common ground can be achieved. Now, your understanding of the nature of this negotiation going on right now, how much ground is likely to be there, both sides can share?
Well, this is really a very difficult situation, and this is really hard to predict because right now we are in a situation that is a little bit weird because this anti-subsidy investigation was announced last September, in the EU's state, the State of Union address. And that, I think, was kind of a strange and weird and rare. And it is not really based on, the actually reported, damages, by the automakers in Europe. And even today, we don't really see those, automakers that are supposed to be protected by this tariff, to report any substantial damages, and the automakers are getting worried about this, protectionist measure, that will, I think, damage, the kind of the free trade order. So that, I think, is the kind of complexity, and also if we see, the top three importers. They didn't vote, for the tariff. The oppositions are coming from car manufacturers, and if we look at the share of imports, by country, the top three importers are Belgium, which import about 55% of all the Chinese EVs. They didn't vote for the tariff, and Germany voted against. And they ranked the second. Spain ranked the third. So you can see there are just 10 countries voted for, and none of them imported a great portion of Chinese EVs, as such that will constitute some sort of competitive pressure. Not to say damages. With that, we seem to be in a very interesting situation. And of course, in terms of the vote, I don't think there's any opportunities that we're going to reverse it.
Mr. Wolf, your
Those
thoughts
are
on that? Possibilities of negotiations.
I believe that if the negotiations have a turn on not exactly tariffs on imports of electric vehicles, but defining their qualities, defining their appearances, or defining the labor force they have to use in Europe, because we have to know that these Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers, they are actually investing in Europe, building up factories, not only battery factories but also car factories,
right,
producing electric cars, and they are actually employing a lot of local people. They are paying a lot of local taxes, which is actually good for the European economy. Not to mention that if the EU doesn't really use these tariffs against China, then China will not take countermeasures on the European exports. It looks like that battery technologies in China, EV technologies in China are a little bit ahead of Europe, a little bit ahead of the rest of the world. So for the ones who want to use the most developed, most environmental friendly and cheapest technologies, with the least footprint on the environment, then probably it's necessary to actually include Chinese products. It's necessary to cooperate with China on technological issues. Not to mention that the Chinese manufacturers, both cars and battery manufacturers, they are like expanding in these years and the upcoming years. They are growing their business. They are taking up new markets, not only Europe, but also in Southeast Asia and in some other places. So their development is a kind of a bit of Europe will not stop them. With these tariffs, it might be beneficial for a few European manufacturers, but in general, probably the European OEMs will suffer disadvantages, and that's why the European opinions are so diverse now.
On the other hand, Mr. Li, what kind of precedents to you as a trade expert this discussion between China and EU regarding electronic vehicles is likely to set for future discussions between the two sides about trade issues?
From the beginning of the countervailing investigation, and even today, if we see the combination of votes, it's kind of interesting to observe that majority of the countries, they either abstained or objected, and only 10 countries, voted for the tariff. So, it's, we are in a very complicated situation, but at the same time, we have to realize, what these complexities will bring about to, the earlier questions about the commitment of EU to fighting, the burning issue of climate changes. And I see, obviously, the impact on the I think on the consumption of low carbon products, including EVs.
Mr. Wolf, earlier I was having interviews with both the Director General of the World Trade Organization as well as the Chinese representative of inside the WTO. We understand that this has been put forward through the WTO process. For example, the complaining at the very beginning and the requirement for establishment of special panels and things like that. So we also noticed that both sides, both China and the EU, have been trying to suggest that they are on the side of the world trade rules. How do you see this debate or this discussion not only setting a precedence for China and the EU in terms of trade issues, but also to a certain extent set a precedence for international trading systems, which is now going through quite a critical transition?
First of all, I need to say that behind the EU decisions, there are also political reasons, not only clear economic reasons. So some of the governments make political decisions on that, who we make friends with, who we don't make friends with, and the EU countries' approach towards China is very two-sided. On the other hand, in the EU, the government subsidies, this is a very strict regulation, and none of the EU member countries are allowed to have any kind of government subsidies in their commercial investments. So some of the Europeans believe that they are not competitive in price with the Chinese products because government subsidies in Europe are more strictly controlled than they are controlled in China, and that is why they are trying to reach to a point when no government subsidies would be allowed on Chinese vehicles which enter the European Union market.
I understand that, but on the other hand, with the punitive tariffs being put on Chinese-made electronic vehicles, one could also argue that is protectionist measures coming from the EU side. Having said that, though, how do you see this very complex web of interests? To a certain extent, how should we understand the result of this discussion eventually, vis-a-vis what is going to be the priority of the EU for the future? Is it going to be industry, economy? Is it going to be politics vis-a-vis businesses and trade? Is it going to be geopolitics as the priority and the priority only? Or is it going to be something else?
You also have to know that the EU member states are very, very different countries. Industry is always a strong voice in the European Union because that is somehow defines the living standard of the people, and industry and economic development and GDP growth. This is what drives the living standard of the people. So I believe that this is always the most important issue. However, political issues will always be there in this diverse environment. So that would be very difficult to make a definite future for that.
Well, basically, we have started to see two different EUs. One is the business EU, based on which EU has been thriving, developing, and has been globalizing. And then the other side of EU is the politicians EU, and that I think is a little more political, or is trying to politicizing, the economic and trade relations between China, particularly in terms of its alliance with the United States, and therefore this seems to go after the so-called political correctness, in terms of dealing with the economic trade relations.
Thank you so much, Li Yong and Chaba Wolf. Appreciate it.